All right. Go
Great.
ahead.
Okay. I'm so sorry. Hi, I am Maura Moyle. I'm on the board of directors for the Reading League. And Jeanne Schopf, who's going to be our amazing presenter tonight, is the president of the Reading League. Let me just bring up your bio really quickly. Sorry, I had some technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. So, Jeanne Schopf is an experienced literacy coach, educator, reading specialist, dyslexia interventionist, and national board certified teacher, early adolescence English, with a demonstrated impact of working in the primary and secondary education populations. She is a dynamic, fun, engaging individual with over 30 years in literacy education and reading acquisition, having taught third, fifth, sixth, and seventh grades with a focus on literacy. Through her business, Pathways Towards Literacy, consulting and tutoring, she consults schools, tutors students with dyslexia, and supports parents in advocating for their child's needs. Jeanne is passionate about using her knowledge and expertise to guide, lead, and teach educators in aligning their literacy practices to the science of reading as an independent consultant for 95% Group, Core, and Transformative Reading Teacher Group. As a certified John Maxwell speaker, trainer, and coach, Jeanne strives to add value to the people that she serves by seeing their potential, making connections, and inspiring lasting change. And I do want to say I will be putting the link for the certificate of attendance in the chat. And please follow us. If you go to Google, you can look up the Reading League Wisconsin, and you can follow us. You can sign up for our newsletter. So I will put that link into the chat as well. So
Yeah,
without further ado, anything else?
that's great. I just stopped sharing because I wanted to make sure they got the materials they needed in the chat. So in the chat, I put down this comprehension lesson plan that I'm going to be talking about tonight. And I also put down some really good article about one of the frameworks that I'm going to be addressing tonight. So, and people, if they come in late, more of how that Zoom goes, you got to keep putting that in the chat throughout because like say Pamela's just coming in now, she's not going to get it because she came in after I put it in. Okay. So,
Oh, okay.
all right. So
Great.
I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to share my screen again and we should be ready to go. All right. Thanks so much for being here. And again, here on Wednesday night, you guys are in classrooms, you're giving up your time and I appreciate you. And so I hope that I can add a little value to you and your students tonight. Okay. So I'm here to talk about this idea of comprehension instruction, right? This idea that we as educators in the classroom are asked to measure comprehension. And we're asked to measure comprehension in ways in which really their own reality doesn't necessarily align with the reading brain, right? And so when I dove into this content, I remember as a middle school reading specialist, okay, I would have teachers come up to me and say, Jeanne, my students can't comprehend. They don't understand. And I'm like, well, what exactly does that mean? What does it mean that they can't comprehend? Right. And so hopefully after our session tonight, you'll have a little better idea about what does it mean that they can't comprehend and what can we do about to support that. All right. So first of all, I know there was a nice introduction to that, but a little bit about me. I am a sum of all teachers, right? So I've been in education for 34 years, now 35 years. But in all reality, my best teachers are my two daughters. Okay, my two daughters are my best teachers. My oldest was a premature child. She was born at 27 weeks, 2 pounds 7 ounces. So she had a rough start to beginning of life. And then my second daughter, she was identified with dyslexia. So when it comes to literacy, those two humans have taught me a lot about what it takes to be a literate human. Okay. But other great teachers were my students, right? 33 years in front of children, they taught me a lot. right? They gave me feedback every day about how I could be a better teacher and how I could show up to be the kind of teacher they needed me to be. And then my other teachers that I've had in my life are all these mentors that have been doing this work long before me. So what you're going to really hear today is really, again, in education. There's not a lot of novel ideas. Most of it has been talked about, but the tool I'm going to give you is a tool that I personally use with my students to support the process of comprehension. So that is novel. Okay. So our goals tonight in this hour is to understand these reading frameworks that really guide our instruction in the classroom. And then understand what educational practices support comprehension instruction. And then I'm going to show you how you can use this lesson plan to actually develop a really rock solid language instruction for your students. Okay? And feel free to drop questions in the chat. Maura will keep an eye on that for sure, and ask anything that, you know, if you have to interrupt me, but hopefully at the end we'll have some time for that, okay? All right, so the first thing that we need to understand about this idea of reading is when children become competent at decoding, it is their competence in language comprehension that will determine their overall reading ability. Right? Think about that for a minute. Their competence in language comprehension will determine their overall reading ability. That's from Oak Hill. So again, here's that big question. What is reading comprehension and how do we measure it? Well, we know one thing for certain, right? First of all, many anthologies or curriculum that you have in front of you are really not all that based on empirical research. Okay? Like as a consultant now, I'm seeing a lot of different tools and I'm looking at the language tools, the anthologies, the basals, however old you are. There were basal readers when I was young. Right now, they're not called that anymore. Whatever textbook you have, anthology, if you look at them, right? And as I go through this, think about how your curriculum is addressing the reading brain, okay? So also in our current curriculum, there's very little direct instructions of strategies that support that reading brain. So what is real? Well, one thing we know, what is reading comprehension? We know what is not. It is not a test score, even though we think it is, right? Our kids can't comprehend. They couldn't pass their test. It's not a test score. Okay? Reading comprehension is not a product either. It's really not a single entity, right? So what is reading comprehension? Okay, hold your socks, right? It is the construction of a memory based on the representation of the text meaning, otherwise known as something called the mental model. Now think about, I bet you there's a room full of readers out here. Think about some of your favorite books. Okay? Now, I've never been one to read one more than once because there's too many books to read. But when you think about you as a reader, do you remember every single minute detail of that book? No, you don't. What do you have? You have a memory, a mental representation of that text. And usually that memory has really, it connected you in some way. So like Maura and I might read the same book. She might have a little different mental representation of that text than I do. Because it really kind of depends upon what? The experiences we bring to that text and our knowledge we bring to that text, which actually helps us kind of like bring meaning to it. Okay? So it's the construction of a memory, right? And you can think about, oh, that favorite book, and you can just bits and pieces, you hang on to that memory of it. And remember, it's not a test score, right? So what is this process of reading comprehension? How do we create this memory, right? How we create it is through the process of simultaneously extracting and constructing meaning through the interaction and involvement with the written language. Think about that. The simultaneous extraction and construction of meaning. And so as you're reading a text, you are continuously updating, right? The construction of meaning based on the information that the author is giving you. You are constructing meaning throughout the whole text. So what you read is building onto it. And along that way, how is your brain able to do that? Right? So your brain has all these linguistic processes that are happening at one time, and all these cognitive processes that are happening at one time.
I was
Right?
so sleepy before.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Let you process that a little bit. Drop things in the chat as we go. So, how do we get to this thing called reading comprehension, where we have basically the construction of this mental model, this representation of the text, right? So, the simple view of reading, developed by Goff and Tummer in 1986, kind of makes this complex process simplistic, but it's not, right? Reading is not simple. So what Goff and Tumner, these are the frameworks now. This is what we're trying to get to, this idea of reading comprehension. It starts with decoding, right? The ability to read the written text, right? To take that speech system and match it to the symbols on the page and decode the words. In order for children to decode, they need automatic retrieval, automatic understanding, automaticity, and phonemic awareness. There's a word I was looking for. Automaticity of the sounds in our language, right? That our language is represented by sounds, and we have the understanding of those sounds. Then, right, we have to have automaticity and accuracy in our phonics patterns, the spelling and the reading and spelling of words. That's decoding, right? But we have to be able to code words fluently and accurately, be able to lift them off the page like this. But along the way, right, we have to have vocabulary, right? And so the reading brain, it's so amazing, the reading brain, right? The reading brain sees a word, automatically goes to the speech system, and then automatically goes to the meaning system and knows the word upon sight. That has to happen automatically, but you can kind of see here, right, that vocabulary is in also language comprehension strand, which we're talking about, and we're going to get in a little deeper, right? And then we have the whole idea of text comprehension, which we're going to get in deeper. So now, both these areas, decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension, we need fluency, right? But in all reality, and I'm glad my colleague Maura is on this call, because she's a phenomenal speech and language pathologist. She understands language, right? Reading is parasitic onto language, and reading begins with strong oral language that helps children develop a strong lexicon of words, right? And that is the bedrock of reading. So let's break that down even more. Scarborough's reading rope, right? So we're talking about getting to this place of skilled reading, right? We have to have a fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. So how does that look? Well, as I just talked about with decoding, we call that word recognition, right? The whole idea of phonological awareness, decoding, And then what has to happen with that reading brain, right, is that reading brain, now sight recognition are not words that are memorized on flashcards. Just remember, sight recognition means any words that your brain can read upon sight. Many of you, I put this slide on, you read all the words upon sight. You did not have to decode them. These words are called sight recognition, right? This has to happen first, decoding first, before we can get to language comprehension. So when we're talking about getting to reading comprehension, and we think about how do we get this idea of a mental representation of the text, what has to happen in the reading brain? Well, first and foremost, children, our students, must have background knowledge. And that background knowledge are all these lived experiences that our children have throughout their lives. Some children have more background knowledge than others, right? And interesting enough, there was a study that happened. I'm from Wisconsin, right? There was a study back in the 1980s. It's called the baseball study. And they did it up in Niagara, Wisconsin, which I thought was so super interesting to learn. And these researchers came in and they gave these skilled readers and these less skilled readers a passage to read about baseball. And guess who did the best? The kids who actually knew about baseball. So the skilled readers who knew nothing about baseball did not score as well compared to the group of kids that were less skilled but knew a lot about baseball, right? So not only do we have to have background knowledge, but kids also have to have prior knowledge. And the difference that means is the background knowledge is the schema of knowledge, these funds of knowledge. But before they read a text, they have to have some prior knowledge before reading it, right? And sometimes kids come in with a misunderstanding of what they believe they think they know. Background knowledge is the Velcro, right? Then what we have to have, right? Vocabulary. Kids have to have a breadth and depth of vocabulary. Matter of fact, the reality is if we're giving our students a passage to read, do you know how many words kids have to read? Have to be able to read upon sight? Drop it in the chat box. How many do you think teachers, how many do you think students need to read upon sight? Well, Margaret, you nailed it. 95%. Yes. 95% of the words kids have to know. They have to have a depth of knowledge of those words. Otherwise, they can never access the text. Right. Then we have the complexity of what? Language structures, right? And so what we find with children in the beginning stages of reading, right? They have simple sentences where you have your subject and your verb and your predicate. But what happens with our older readers, and as they get up in the grade bands, right? They get complex sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, compound complex sentences. And so kids have to be able to have a breakdown and understanding of the syntax of the sentences. Then we get to write the heart of reading, which is inferring. And what do children need to do to infer? What they need to be able to do is understand what the author is saying implicitly, not explicitly. But what linguistic and cognitive processes are in play when a child is inferring? Well, first, I have to activate my background knowledge. Next, I have to be able to read the words on the page, cognitive linguistic processes. And then I have to put it together to understand what the author is trying to say. Inferring is a complex process. And then the whole idea of literary knowledge, okay? And so what we mean by that is genre, right? Each genre has a text structure, right? So narrative text has the narrative plot line, right? Informative text, it could be descriptive, it could be sequential, it could be cause effect, it could be compare contrast, it could be problem solution. And then we're asking kids to dial in and read informative, argumentative text, right? All that has to be in place. Now, think about your textbooks. Do any of your textbooks in front of you teach all those processes systematically and explicitly? I bet not. But this is what we have to teach in order for kids to get to that mental model. And unfortunately, our textbooks do not provide that for us. Okay? I was just looking at one the other day. Now, this is a model, this is the last one I'm going to talk about, that probably is not talked about much, but you can see on the bottom of the page, right? This was actually developed, and what's beautiful about this model, this direct and indirect effects of reading model, it is tested and it holds up, okay? And it was developed by Young Suk Kim, okay? And what I like about this model compared to the other models, right, is yes, it has reading comprehension at the top. It has text reading. It has word reading. It has listening comprehension. But guess what? Here we have content, world, discourse, knowledge, social, emotional development. But keep going. Here are these emergent literacy skills. Got to have the lower end of the rope. That's the decoding. But look over here. We also know in order for children to get to comprehension, right, we have to have higher order cognition and regulation. And most importantly, you can see this is the foundation, executive functioning skills, working memory, inhibitory control, and attention control. Reading is working memory, right? And most of us teach in inclusive classrooms. So we have kids who can access text and they're skilled readers. And we have a lot of kids that need a lot of support, and our tools do not provide them. So now this is a model. Oh, I thought it was going to be the last one. But so those frameworks really kind of help you understand all the processes that go into reading comprehension. What about planning? How do you plan for reading comprehension, right? How do you plan for students to get to that mental model? Well, first of all, again, I kind of talked about this. We think about the reader. The reader has cognitive abilities. The reader has motivation. And the reader has knowledge and experiences. We have to keep the reader in front of us. Then we have to think about what is the text that I'm asking them to read. And we know our Common Core state standards, I believe it's number 10, because there's only 10 of them, says what? Grade level text. Grade level text, right? All our children, whether they can decode at grade level or not, should be provided a diet of grade level text. It's a must, right? We can't think, and I was actually just in a classroom not too long ago, and I was having the same conversation with teachers about the critical importance of giving kids grade level content text. We need decodables, we need connected text, but we also need grade level. Why? Because they need the vocabulary and the sentence structure. And she's like, but the kids can't read it. I'm like, we got to get them there. They got to have an access to it, right? Because text is complex. Complexity means plot, characters, setting, all that comes into play. Then what about the activity, right? What are we asking them to do? They have to have the linguistic processing, the semantic processing, and the comprehension monitoring. Whoa! There's a lot here, isn't there? So now, what is reading comprehension, everyone? Think of it like an orchestra, right? All these processes coming together, right, to develop this mental model. So what is reading comprehension? It's not a test score and it's not a product. It is not a single entity that can be explained in a unified cognitive model. Instead, it is the orchestrated product of a set of linguistic and cognitive processes operating on a text and interacting with background knowledge, features of text, and the purpose and goals of the reading situation. So how do we get them there? Okay. First of all, Think of your favorite movie. My favorite movie, one of my all-time favorite movies, Dances with Wolves. How many times have you watched your favorite movie? Have you watched it more than once? I bet you have. After repeatedly viewing that favorite movie, how has your understanding of the film changed? Right? Each time you see it, you see layers and layers of the film, the story that you didn't see the first time. Like, oh, I never got that, right? So now, why has the understanding of your film changed? Because each time you watched it, what were you doing? Extracting and constructing and building upon the meaning you had the first time. So we have to rethink our reading instruction, right? We have to be thinking that no, we are not just going to give one look to that text, right? We want to make sure that we are giving kids repeated opportunities to read the same text. Why? Because, oh, I don't know what happened there. I'm going to hit enable. I don't know what that means. I just hit. Okay. Why? I'm trying to hit my mouse. Okay. Because the first time we read the passage, we're just skimming the surface. It's called the surface code, right? We're recognizing the words on the page. We're activating background knowledge. We're getting a sense of the structure of the text. Where is it going? We're really getting the lay of the land. The second time we read it, it's called the text code, right? Now we're getting that literal meaning of the text. We're really getting the basics of who did what and why they did it. And then finally, where we really want to get kids into that place where they're really going to get that mental model is that we also call it the situation model. And that means the reader creates that mental representation of the text based on what? Intertwining that background knowledge and the meaning of the text. And now you walk away with the memory of that text, that visual representation of the text. We can't get to that situational model with only one read. There's too much to take in a text, right? So that's where I kind of want to go. Now, most of us, right, live in a world where, in classroom teachers, we have grade level standards. And in that world, we have things called learning targets, right? And so when we think about our grade level standards and our learning targets, right, what we want to be able to do, and some textbooks do a fine job at this, some do not. We want to make sure that we build text sets together. And so as a classroom teacher, as a 7th grade English language arts teacher, I looked upon my anthology as a resource, right? It was a tool that I could use. I did always go in order to what it was, because why? I wanted to help my students get that text set. Now, luckily, most of our new textbooks have text sets, but if you're working in a space that they don't, we want to build them. So here's an example of a unit. A unit would be like, my unit is the civil rights movement. I'm a 7th, 8th grade middle school teacher, and I'm going to start my unit with a universal question. And why do I want to start with a universal question or an endearing understanding is because the reality is I want to cognitively engage my students. That is what sets the purpose. So you can see the example that I'm going to give you here tonight, right, is about nonviolent protest. So look what I pulled. I pulled these from commonlit.org. Maybe Maura can Google it, drop it in the chat. It is free. There's another one called ReadWorks, but for the upper grades, I prefer Common Lit for the older grades for a variety of reasons. They give me text sets too. So you can see I selected the sit-in movement, showdown in Little Rock, Rosa Parks. So they all have to relate to what? Nonviolent protests. So my universal question, how are nonviolent protests effective in, my thing is gone, in making change? Okay. So everybody still with me here? I got my text set. I got my question. Now, what is it that I want them to do at the very end? If my learning target is, what do I want my students to know and be able to do at the end of this unit or end of this text? As some of you have not heard of Hess's cognitive rigor framework, it is a great place to start because you can get down to the higher levels of the DOK levels where you really want kids to be at the end. Why? You want them cognitively engaged in that final end. Okay? So going back to now that RAND model, going back to instruction, it is what? What do I want my students to know and be able to do? My success criteria. How will they show me what they learned? And I'm going to go to that Hess's DOK framework. How are they going to show me what they've learned? Okay, so let's break it down. Now, what you might want to have now is that lesson plan in front of you if you can. So because most curriculum is not designed to really engage the reading brain and engage our students and motivate them, I created this little document and it worked for me. Hopefully it'll work for you. So I kind of started with, okay, I have to start with a text set or theme. So the theme would be, right, the civil rights movement. What is the title of the text that I'm having my kids read today? So critically important, scholars out there, purpose. Why are my students reading this passage? Because generally speaking, particularly in the upper grades, you know what most of our purposes are for most of our students? Just finish. They just want to get it done. It's just something that they have to do, right? So if we consider motivation, that's on us as educators. We have to set the purpose to get them excited about reading this text. And how we get them excited is having that overarching essential question that they know is that human condition, right? Nonviolent protests. How do nonviolent protests how are they effective, right? And then here, I have to know before I teach, and my kids have to know. This is another thing, right, that I see in a lot of schools. I see kids not knowing why they're reading something. They don't know why they're reading. The teacher gave it to them. They're reading it, right? They have to know, I want them to be able to do at the end of this and be able to show me. And I have to have, and this is how I'm measuring it. It's called my success criteria, okay? So what does that look like? So civil rights, to learn about how children use nonviolent techniques for change. That is my purpose for reading this text. What is my title? Kids Who Fought for Change. What is my essential question? And I kind of already shared that with you. My essential question is, how are nonviolent protests effective for making change? What is my learning target? What do I want kids to know and be able to do? I want them to know I want them to be able to summarize the gist of the text. This is the who, did what, where, when, why, or how, right? That would be just for my first read. And then my success criteria for this first read might be writing objective summary. So this is just my first, read, okay? Because this is step one, designing deliberate instruction. So now I have to think about, this is what I want them to be able to do at the end of reading this one passage. I have to think about my planning, right? This is where the deliberate instruction comes into play. I have to plan and I have to think, what background knowledge do my students have to have before reading this text? Now, some textbooks do an okay job with that, but you might have to add more. I have to think, what vocabulary words? Now, trust me, when you go through some of these anthologies, they have bold-faced words, and I don't even know why they're bold-faced. Like, Why did this textbook company think that that word was important? I, as the teacher, have to determine the words that are central to understanding, getting to that essential question. What words do they really need to know in order to answer that essential question and get to that success criteria? Okay. Language structure. Which sentences are really going to mess our students up? Which spaces in the text do I really need to dial in? And they're going to have help inferring. And finally, how is my text organized and how can I help them? So before I even open up the textbook, as I have to design this deliberate instruction, right? If I want to get them to that mental model at the end, I have to design the instruction around it, right? All right, so this is in that planning document. Have to ask yourself these questions. How can I activate and support access to knowledge? What 3 to 5 words will I teach explicitly? Which means these are the words that are central to the text, to getting to that idea of that essential question. It might not be the bold-faced ones, right? I want to make sure that I give them a student-friendly definition. I provide examples and non-examples. There's questions that they're going to interact with. I give them opportunity to think, pair, share, and I have them see it, say it, and write it. Now, the most inefficient way for kids to learn vocabulary is to write the definition. Don't have them do it, right? Now, unfortunately, with this time we have tonight, I really can't dive into how to teach those vocabulary words. Perhaps I can do another one at some point. But I do know if you Google, there's plenty of content out there about explicit vocabulary instruction, okay? And then I have to think, what sentences will I need to teach explicitly? What sentences need to be connected to support inferring? What figurative language needs to be taught? And then finally, which graphic organizer will support the story structure? And how will the students use the graphic organizer? So I created this plan to help you think about ahead of time the organization of this text and have it up for your students as an anchor chart. Okay? So what are some things you can do to activate background knowledge? Now, there's a really good resource out there. Maura put it in the chat. It's called Reading Universe, and is put together by an organization that wants to give teachers tools to teach kids to read. And so if you Google the Reading Universe, you're going to get all kinds of ideas and get support from stuff that I'm talking to you about today, okay? So what could you do to support background knowledge? Here's a couple examples. KWL, a pre-quiz, anticipation guide, any kind of charts, webs, maps, timeline, even brainstorm writing, all right? And it's really critical, right, that we understand the research. Acquisition of new knowledge is faster when something is already known about the text. We got to activate background knowledge. Vocabulary, I kind of talked about this already a little bit. We have to think about words that are most critical to understanding the overarching idea of the text. Think, what high utility, high impact words, tier 2, need to be taught and reviewed daily. So on day 1, I'm just really not giving them one time. Every day we're reviewing these words. And we kind of already talked about how many you need to know. That's by Nagy and Scott's research, 90 to 95%. I have some scholars in the field here that knew that answer. That's pretty brilliant. All right, what about language structures, right? We do have to think about this, friends. We have to think about which sentences am I going to teach before the kids even get into the passage the first time. Like, I know they're going to have a hard time following the construction of that sentence. Oftentimes, like, it could be a sentence where there's, a complex or compound sentence where there's a lot of pronouns and the kids are not following the pronouns, right? Or it might be a sentence where we'd have to teach the signal word and what it's doing within the sentence. embedded phrases or words or phrase substitutions. So you might want to find a couple of those sentences that you're going to pre-teach before that you know they're going to struggle in and that you already talked about it and taught it and they shouldn't have any problem when they engage it in the text. So think about this research here. If a reader cannot parse the types of complex sentences that are often encountered in academic text, no amount of comprehension strategy instruction will help. Okay? Wow. All right. Keep it rolling here. Verbal reasoning. Which sentences need to be connected to support inferring? There's going to be some sentences there that kids are going to struggle with. They maybe don't have the vocabulary. Maybe they're going to have to activate background knowledge that some of them might have. Is it okay to teach that? Yes, it is. Teach it ahead of time. Also, what figurative language needs to be taught? Similes, metaphors, personification, idioms. Teach the hard ones before they even get access to the text, okay? All right. Again, talked about this a little bit already. Literary knowledge. What graphic organizer will support the story structure? How will my students use a graphic organizer? Now, I am not a teacher that's going to have them filling it out. It's there to support them. I will model as we go. I might have it because guess what? That is not my product. I'm not going to measure their understanding at the end of this lesson by having them fill out a graphic organizer. The graphic organizer supports their understanding of the text. It's a scaffold for those kids who struggle with working memory, who struggle with attention. It's a support, okay? It's not a measuring tool, okay? All right. So day one, surface code. What I want the kids to do is the readers so basically I pre-teach, right? So that might be like day one. Now this might be day two, depending upon your dime. But I'm pre-teaching, and now we're going to go through that surface code, okay? The reader is just going to recognize the words in the text, activate background knowledge, maybe make some predictions along the way. That's that surface code, right? So you're going to see in my lesson plan, right? Day one, surface code. Text reading. First of all, I want to make sure, do my students understand the purpose of reading and the essential question? That has to be on the board along with my learning target. Now, usually my first time I'm going to read it, we're going to choral read the whole passage together. Everybody, eyes on print. We're going to read this together. Ready? Read. And we'll read a paragraph at a time. We'll maybe predict as we go, get to the end of the page, maybe make a prediction. Then maybe I'll say, oh, make a prediction because it's the first time they're seeing it. Why don't you think about what you think is going to happen next? Pair, share. I want to get oral language in there. The teacher should not be doing all the talking. We have to develop the oral languages in our classrooms and get kids to talk, right? I might have them just turn and talk. I might have a sentence stem. My prediction is, because if we want them to write in a complete sentence, we got to have them respond in a complete sentence, okay? Now, probably my first time around, I might ask them to predict, visualize what's happening, turn to your neighbor. What are you visualizing? Oh, did anybody make a connection? Think we're reading it along. We're just connecting. We're just going through the surface code, getting the lay of the land, okay? Vocabulary. Now, along this first read, I probably will be teaching some words incidentally as I go, okay? Because 95% of the words they need to know, and I can't teach them all explicitly, right? And some of the words, when I come across the ones that are really critical, that are ones that I pre-taught, I'll probably restate the definition as I'm going, right? I will probably, while we're reading the first time, I did teach a few before I read, but now what I'm going to do is as we're reading along, I might, oh, who is he referring to? Who was they referring to? Did you notice that bed meant sofa? And just point those things out where the author has substituted some nouns that they might not have followed. Now, at the end of the first read, right, I want to ask those text-dependent questions. General understanding, right? Who did what, where, when, we're just having this overarching conversation. And at the end, I'm going to go back to my essential question. Think about what you think your answer is. Think, pair, share. So I'm going right back to that essential question because I want them to learn something from the first read. That's day one. Okay. I'm just going to keep an eye on the time because I want to get through everything. Because I know I have probably some questions in the queue. Okay, day two now we're going to get to that text code where we're going to get underneath the surface and we're going to dive a little deeper. And so what's going to happen there is, again, I'm going back to this text-dependent questions. And really, I might be thinking, I already did the right there questions, the first read. Now I might be thinking a little think and search. I might be doing a little author and me. I want to stay away from on my own because I'm going to get sidetracked on that. Okay. It'll break it down a little bit more. So again, before I read that a second time, I'm going to prepare my students for that reading, right? I'm going to review the purpose. I'm going to review vocabulary. I might explain the text structure, and I'll probably review the essential question. Now, we're going to read it a second time. Guess what? We're going to echo read this time. I read a sentence, you read a sentence. I read a paragraph, you read a paragraph, okay? Now, again, I'm going to go through. This is where I want kids to make connections between paragraphs, right? This is where we're constantly extracting and constructing meaning. I might now want to ask those deeper questions that get to the, well, why did the character do that? How did the character do that? Explain why so really kind of getting into those questions at a little deeper level, okay? Whoopsie, I went too tight. Oral language, again, I'm always building that in. I want a lot of think, pair, share, sentence stems. As we go, I'm reviewing that vocabulary on day two. Text structure, it's up on the board. Now what I want them to do is do a gist framework, right? Who did what, when, where, why, how, so. And at the bottom, I'm recording, how did my lesson go? What do I got to do differently next time? Okay? All right. Now, day three, remember, we're constantly building upon that mental memory and what we've learned. We're going to get to that mental representation of the text, integrating that background knowledge and that meaning, that situation model. So now what I want to do, I'll probably decide which part of here I'm going to do. That's why they're check boxes. You don't have to do them all. You pick whatever your kids need. Now, third time, there's a couple different things I could do here. You know, I might have some really skilled readers who are ready to just read this independently on their own. I might have some skilled readers that maybe can partner with other readers. I might still have to have a group with me that aren't really quite ready to access the grade level text, and I might do a close reading with them. That means I read in a small table, okay, something like that. So you have to kind of determine the needs of your students, how you're going to read this the third time. Again, you're going to be focusing in on, right, vocabulary. Always, what vocabulary words are you going to focus? Restating, examples. Remember, every day you're going through those core vocabulary words. Verbal reasoning. Now, this is where we want to really dive into the deeper layers of the text, where they're evaluating and they're constructing meaning. Where should we draw inferences in order to get to that essential question? Where do kids really have to tie things together? Okay. And then always want to have opportunities for oral language. Think, pair, share, turn and talk, sentence stems, discussion stems. Now, for upper grades, I love diving into the whole idea of Socratic seminar on the third read. And there's a lot of great information on that. I love to use that in the upper grades. After reading now, how will my students demonstrate their mental representation of the text? Right? I might ask them to do a written summary, answer essential questions or other. Now, remember I said this is a text set. So this was just one of the texts that we read, and it took us probably 4 days to get through. Then the next time we're going to pull together the other text and go through the same process. And then we're going to grab the third text And then we're going to pull it all together using the cognitive framework, where they're pulling all these texts together into that higher level of thinking and answering that big essential question. All right. So teaching reading is rocket science. And I kept the pace pretty tight because there was a lot of content here and I don't want you to fall asleep on me. But I also want to make sure that there's time to ask some questions. And I think there's a few in the box. Okay. So go ahead, Maura, or people can, I'm gonna stop sharing too. If people want to on mic, or if we just want to talk about it.
Yeah, so we had a question a while back about the model with the pillars, the author of that, which I think actually was answered by a participant, but I wanted to make sure. So it was Young Grace Kim. Is that
Yeah, Young Suk Kim. Mm-hmm.
Young Suk Kim. Okay, great. So that was that. And then we had a few recent questions. When you echo read, do you and the students read alternate paragraphs, or do the students read the same paragraph that the teacher just read?
With echo reading, again, it depends on your students, right? It depends on your grade level and depends on the text, right? So I might go a whole paragraph if it's an upper grade students, right? If it's lower grade and they need more support, more scaffolding, I would go sentence by sentence. So it really depends on your students in front of you and what scaffolding they need, as how much, right? Remember, we talk about working memory being so critical, right? For some of the kids, it's their working memory. And again, some of them are not going to have the word recognition, the decoding to have quite access to all that grade level text. So it depends on your students.
Okay, great. Another question, in the upper grade, students are often reading novels. How do you do repeated readings with a chapter book that requires a lot of time just for the initial read?
Right. And be quite honest, as a seventh grade English language arts teacher, we only read two novels. I use short stories. And so the reality is I think we can get lost swimming into novels a little bit too much in the upper grades. I think we have to dial in to think about what is our critical content standards and our academic standards, and which novel will support that, and why are we reading a novel? Right? Now I like to, when I was a seventh grade ELA teacher, right? I like to use a novel really because I had to partner it with social studies. So I like to bring it into my other content areas, right? And so I think sometimes we get novel heavy, and I think it's better for kids, right, to be engaged in text sets, anthologies, text sets. So if I were to do, I probably wouldn't have to be able to do this framework. I mean, I'd have to do this framework in a novel. Like what I like to do if I had to do a novel is I would read a chapter and I would model it and we read it together. And then I would have them read the chapter on their own. The kids who couldn't access grade level text, they often had Kindles support so they could access the text. They always had a purpose for reading. They always had to have some reason why they were reading it on their own. And if the kids really needed support, I would have it at the back table and I would read it with them.
So, and just in general, there is a question, how important is echo or choral reading?
Well, it's pretty critical because you're going to have kids in your front of you who can't access grade level text, right? And if we come into the, I mean, if any of you spent any time listening to Anita Archer, she's going to talk about every kid every time, right? And so we have to have all kids following along with us because, again, we think about motivation and we think about memory. And if we don't have the kids reading with us, we're going to lose them. We're going to lose them. So, but it keeps them engaged. And you think, oh, I can't have seventh graders. They did it. Sixth graders read it with me. Seventh graders read it with me. They love actually being read along with. They love that actually.
I think there was one other. I'd love to know your recommendation for an assessment that teachers can use to probe reading comprehension. Do you have thoughts about the GORT?
Yeah, I mean that's above my pay grade as far as these assessments that dial in. And again, as I said, and Hugh Cat says this right, Comprehension isn't a single entity that can be measured by a single measure, right? It's too complex for that because there's so many variables that go into play. As we talked about, background knowledge, vocabulary, syntax, text structure, that it's really hard to measure. And so one things that we like to do as teachers too is we kind of get hung up in this thing called Lexile number. What's the Lexile, right? And in all reality, if you dove into that, you understand how that really is not a true measure of a complexity of a text. I find it quite interesting that there's a book that I often read with fifth graders, Gary Paulson, one of my most favorite authors of all time, right? And he likes to write really long sentences, run-on sentences. So a book like Hatchet or Brian's Winter, it's about this thick, is Lexile's over 1,000.
Wow.
Right? Whereas a book like a Book Thief, seventh grade, have to know a lot about World War II. There's so much knowledge and vocabulary. Lexile, 750. Why? Because there's not complex sentence. So it's really, really, really difficult, right? To you have to know your books, you have to know your literature, and you have to know your students.
Well, we just have a minute left and we have a few housekeeping items. One is that the link to request a certificate of attendance apparently is not accepting. Someone, Robin said it's no longer accepting responses. Do you think I should have participants email me and then I can pass that on to Mary?
Yes, let's put our emails in the Dropbox. Okay. And let's put the email. I'm gonna put the emails. And I'm really bad, Andrea. I always forget my email for the reading link. I gotta Google it. I'm like, what is? Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. So here's my Reading League email address. So I see somebody in here that would like to have my slide deck. I'm willing to share that, but you're going to have to email me on this address and then I can connect with you.
Okay, and the recording will be on YouTube. If you search on YouTube, the Reading League Wisconsin, all of our sessions will be on there.
I spelled league wrong.
What was that?
Go ahead, keep going.
Oh, all of our sessions are on there. Anyone can access them. So soon, Mary Newtoner will be uploading this recording to YouTube.
All right, I'm going to get my email up here to everyone in the meeting. There. And if you Google the Reading League Wisconsin, I believe you'll find us there. There's email there. And if you find us on Facebook, I'm there too.
Yes.
And you can message me.
So I apologize for that, but we'll figure out a way to get you a certificate of attendance.
Yep, email, and then we'll get it to you.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, so thank you. And join us February 6th. Steve Dykstra will be presenting. And February 13th, Jeannie will be having the Teacher's Lounge.
Oh yeah, we love the lounge. I'd love to see you guys in my lounge on a Saturday morning. Bring your coffee cups. We talk about all kinds of great things.
Yes. So
and I also want to point out we do have a conference.
Yes, October 4th.
Yeah, we are.
In Brookfield. It'll be fantastic.
If any of you here from Wisconsin online.
Yes.
Thank you so much for giving me your time tonight. I know how valuable your evenings are, your family, and spending time with us tonight. And I hope reach out and I hope it brought some value to you tonight and ask anytime. So thank you so much. We can stop recording, right?
Yes. Thank you so much, Jeannie. Thank you everyone for joining. Join us again, please. We'd love to have you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks,